Thank you all very much for coming. I must apologize for having kept you so long. But the meeting which I had with the Honorable Opposition Leader went considerably longer than I had anticipated. So for those of you who came for a 3:30 press conference, I'm sorry that you've had to wait so long. Are you all ready? You hearing me now? Are you hearing me now? Who isn't hearing me? Because my light is on and I don't know that I... Okay? What I propose to do is to just give you a brief report on what has happened this afternoon here in the Parliament. As you have been covering for the last few days, as Prime Minister, in furtherance of the business of the nation and the parliamentary business in particular, I invited my parliamentary colleague, the Leader of the Opposition, for a sit-down where we can talk about the work that we are supposed to be engaged in. And when I did that, I had left it open-ended without identifying the matters which I wanted to raise with her if that opportunity was afforded. She responded by saying that she would like to see an agenda, I guess in preparation for the meeting, and I was quite happy to have distilled one, and I gave her an agenda of a number of items which I was of the view required the attention of both the government and the opposition. And she suggested that 2 or 3 more matters could be added, and I agreed to that as well. I didn't see why there was any need for a lot of discussion as to why she wasn't being allowed to, because the bottom line is I agreed to it, and we got there, and there were 9 or 10 matters that we had before us to address this afternoon. And in short, I can tell you that the afternoon was very well spent, and the discussions went very well. I have been in this Parliament since January 1987, and I've been in opposition a number of times. I've been in government a number of times, and I've never had this experience before. And it is a good experience to be able to sit down with your opposite number and to discuss at length, in some detail, the issues that we are required to attend to in the public interest. Item number 1 that we discussed was the whole question of self-government for Tobago. And I raised this matter with the opposition leader, who, as a former Prime Minister, had actually addressed this matter from 2 fronts. It was addressed by her on the platform in Tobago, where the party that she led offered the people of Tobago internal self-government. And in the Parliament, a document had been laid which had attempted to address this. And from my end, the PNM at a convention and at other times, including election campaigns, held out to Tobago this whole question of self-government, and the PNM supported and encouraged the preparation of the document which is now before the Cabinet, produced in Tobago after widespread consultation, and the Cabinet is now to treat with it and see to what extent we can satisfy the aspirations of the people of Tobago. But I did say to the opposition leader that going back to the efforts of Mr. Robinson, her efforts, my efforts now, the one thing that is not clear is what exactly is in internal self-government. and what exactly does Tobago want? That question has to be answered before legislative clauses can be drafted by a legal draftsperson. We believe that that matter is partway answered by the consultations and the documentation produced in Tobago. But what I held out to the opposition leader was that we could bring to the Parliament, by way of the Cabinet, what has been produced to us from Tobago, now in the form of that draft legislation, and along with what was done by the opposition in 2015, that we could put that to a House committee of government and opposition members. Such a committee would now reconnect with this issue of internal self-government and do whatever consultations are required in contact with the people of Tobago under the umbrella of the Parliament, and try to come to a position of answering this question of what is internal self-government for Tobago and what do the people of Tobago want. And in answering those questions, we could come to a position where we can have draft legislation which the government will be responsible for preparing with this involvement and present it to the Parliament for debate and for assent. And that has been agreed to by the opposition, that we'll pursue that line. So there's to be a House committee to receive from the Cabinet the documentation in all its form that exists on this matter. And of course, this House committee, for this matter in particular, would attract the involvement of the public, so there would be some element of public consultation, and we proceed to do this as quickly as we can in furtherance of the aspirations of the people of Tobago. The other matter that we dealt with was campaign finance reform. And the opposition leader pointed out that a lot of work by way of documentation had been done on this matter in this Parliament, and there are reports, and they were referenced by her. There's a report of a Joint Select Committee of May 6, 2015. That report and that initiative died when the Parliament was dissolved in 2015. And that was the report of a Joint Select Committee that had been empaneled in November 2014 on this subject of campaign finance reform. There's also a parliamentary record of October 2006. And there's the Senate Hansard of the Diosaran motion of 2009. And the opposition leader referenced these documents and these efforts as a good starting point for us to re-engage this issue of campaign finance reform. And the opposition leader indicated to me that she too, on her side, is of the view that the time has come for us to legislate this issue of campaign financing in Trinidad and Tobago. And we both agreed that we would work on this with a view to having the legislation enacted before the next general election is due. And in doing so, the opposition leader suggested, and I had no difficulty in acquiescing to the suggestion, and that is without benefit of my team, but I saw no difficulty in agreeing that that's a good suggestion to consider and pursue, to put this matter before the Law Reform Commission as an assignment, and that the Office of Prime Minister, the government, would resource the Commission to meet all its needs in terms of personnel and other resources to specifically address this issue and to conduct whatever public consultation is required, and to consult other jurisdictions inside and outside of the Commonwealth, just other jurisdictions, and come up with a green paper on the subject, which will further the public consultation, with a view to having the government, with the opposition's involvement, produce a white paper for the consideration of the Parliament. All of this to be done with some sense of urgency so as to conclude this assignment and to have legislation in place well before the next general election. On the matter of anti-gang and the bail legislation, we discussed a number of issues relating to the response to crime and criminality. And I indicated to the opposition leader that it is the government's intention to bring back to Parliament legislation meant to deal with anti-gang considerations and bail considerations. The opposition leader pointed out why the last effort failed and where the opposition had difficulty. And we agreed that the Attorney General will bring back a position, but prior to bringing it back, we'd consult with the opposition for any input that they might have, and would introduce any amendments that may be required to consider improvements or concerns that the opposition may have, which could see them removing the obstacles to passing this particular suite of legislation. So it is for the opposition, for the government now, to, through the Office of the Attorney General, to proceed along that path and to establish and maintain contact with the opposition as this matter evolves. In discussing the issue of crime, the opposition leader focused a bit on the non-legislative aspects of the fight against crime. And she expressed her concern that the last meeting that we had, she was not satisfied that the government had been sufficiently robust in responding to some of the suggestions made and so on. I indicated to her that her views were not entirely correct, that we had not responded, but maybe that she was not as informed as she should be. And to treat with that, I undertook to provide the opposition leader by the end of the month an update of the activity of the government with respect to this whole question of the non-legislative response to crime fighting. And on the legislative side, we both agreed that the government should put, by way of the Attorney General, put to the opposition an alternative draft piece of legislation for consideration to repeal and replace the current arrangements for the appointment of a commissioner of police. The opposition also requested that the government support the opposition's request to the Parliament for an additional legal officer in the office of the opposition, and I gave the opposition leader the assurance that the government would look favorably on that, because it was put to us that that office needs more legal help if it is to effectively treat with the workload that we are putting in that direction at this point in time. With respect to the JLSC and the current crisis that faces the judiciary, where the unpleasant fact is that there are persons who are incarcerated and whose cases cannot progress through the law courts because of recent developments which I need not detain you with. And I had indicated publicly a while ago, I think it was at a press conference at the airport, I indicated that I had been given some low-level advice or non-rigorous advice that this matter may end up in the Parliament. I indicated to the opposition leader then that in consultation with the Attorney General, who had been in consultation with elements of the judiciary, mainly the DPP and the Chief Justice, the Attorney General had come to me with proposals coming from the DPP indicating that the solution to that problem that now exists could be legislative, and there could be a requirement for the Parliament to meet and legislate amendments to the Summary Courts Act and the Preliminary Inquiries Act, so that the problem that now exists, as I outlined a while ago, people not being able to have their matters heard, could be dealt with. The opposition leader made it quite clear that the opposition is not prepared to support this approach because they do not believe that that approach is sound, and there will be more problems created than solved because people who are affected have already begun to challenge the situation, and that there are certain rights and privileges and protections to which they are entitled, and this arrangement of having the DPP intervene and make rulings and interventions to make fits and starts would trample on some of those rights. And it is the view of the opposition that whatever we legislate will be open to challenge, and the opposition leader buttressed those arguments against the judgment of the repeal of Section 34, which succeeded because certain conditions existed, and it is her view that those conditions do not now exist, and we would fail if we try to do that again. And therefore, they are insisting that we look for a solution under Section 137, where we determine the full nature of the problem, because the opposition, like the rest of the country, does not have answers to questions as to who is the chief magistrate, whether a judge exists, whether the judge is being paid, if a magistrate is being paid, who is acting, who is giving these instructions, and all kinds of complications. So we had no agreement on that. What we did have is an agreement that the Attorney General will continue to consult and will consult with the opposition on this matter, and I will have to take my guidance from elsewhere. So there's a lot more to be done here. We discussed the whole question that has come into focus on the lack of transparency in the appointment of judges to the High Court, and the concerns of the national community about the process by which persons end up on the bench. And we agreed that this matter requires our attention, and there should be further discussions on this matter with a view to modernizing the process by which persons are selected to serve on the bench in Trinidad and Tobago. So that would be the subject of further discussion and further subsequent parliamentary intervention. On the question of service commissions, I raised with the opposition leader my concerns that the origins of service commissions and the purpose by which they came into being might in many instances be outlived, and that what exists today in Trinidad and Tobago might be serious impediments to good order and good management. There's poor accountability. questionable performance and an anathema to good management and best practice. And what might have served us at the start of our independence in 1962 certainly does not serve us now. And therefore, the time has come for us as a country to review this situation, and since it can only be affected by actions of the opposition and the government, that the opposition and the government address this issue to see what changes might be required and what assistance we can get in coming to a position which can satisfy the necessary demands, which is to have in Trinidad and Tobago proper management arrangements of the persons who now fall under these various commissions, where it is legendary that time is not of the essence, and effects do not work for the public. For the benefit of all those involved, staff and the public, there needs to be some significant adjustments, improvements, and evolution of the role and involvement of service commissions in the management of the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. And we agreed that the work that the Canadian government is doing for us now, some work has been done with respect to this particular issue, but at a slightly lower level, or as a step in the right direction. I've indicated to the opposition leader that in furtherance of this matter and treating with this issue, that I would write to the Canadian government asking them for continued and further help to take this matter forward with respect to the modernization of the management institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, based largely on Canadian models, which we have been having some access to with our parliament and other aspects recently. I will do that, and the opposition leader encouraged that that be done. I also raised with the opposition leader my view and the widespread view that the Integrity Commission has lost the confidence of the national population, and the history would show that what it was intended to do, which is in furtherance of an improvement in matters of integrity and ethics in Trinidad and Tobago, have not been and are not being addressed. And the Commission itself has become, rather than a solution, a part of the problem. And it is my view as head of this government that the Integrity Commission, as an institution fit for purpose, ought to be reviewed for us to determine whether what happens now is in fact having any chance of providing what we anticipated when that body was brought into being. And on that basis, the government, by way of the Attorney General's office, is prepared to advance to the opposition positions for review of the legislation to determine whether other models can be considered in the light of the failure of our efforts to bring about the results that we anticipated at the time when this commission was brought into being. Whatever we produce on this score, I've agreed that we would do so in full consultation with the opposition, and something will eventually come to the Parliament if there's opposition support for that, because the government does not have the majority, and this requires some significant public debate before it gets anywhere near action in the Parliament. But I was prepared to put my neck out as a non-betting man and say that the general view in this country is that that initiative has failed. The other issue that I raised was the issue of the Code of Conduct for Parliamentarians, which is a matter that had attracted the Parliament early in the life of the NER government, when a motion was brought by Mr. Robinson. That motion was debated in the lower house and was passed, and it went to the upper house and lapsed. We believe that the time has come for proper arrangements in legislative form and details using models which exist elsewhere in the Commonwealth to put in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago a proper documentation for observance by members of Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we would strive and aspire to better conduct and to respond effectively to the various levels of misconduct which might attract the attention of the Parliament. And those things are available, and what we agreed to do is to ask the Clerk of the House to canvass the Commonwealth, including, I might say, I didn't say this to the opposition leader, including asking the, well, I'm saying it here now as speaking for the government, asking the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to assist us in putting together a response to this concern, so that we can have in Trinidad and Tobago a proper, thank you, a proper response to the need for code of conduct for parliamentarians in our parliament. We discussed the issue of jobs as raised by the opposition leader when she did say we should bring that in. And the opposition leader agreed that what I was asking for was a discussion largely along legislative lines, and she did raise, under the heading of jobs, the requirement for the government to proceed with the commitment for legislative reform of the Severance Benefit Act, to treat with issues like what happened at ArcelorMittal and similar situations. And that is a commitment which the current Minister of Labour had made some statements on, and the opposition leader was of the view that having made the statements, the government had not moved to bring it to reality. And also there's a requirement, again, where the government is in agreement that there's some need, and the labor movement is also adamant that there's some aspects of the Industrial Stabilization Act that require upgrading and modernizing, and we agree to look at that. The opposition leader asked that those be given some priority. And I mentioned to her that we had also agreed in discussion with the labor movement at an earlier time, this whole question of the recognition and certification processes that seem to be long and drawn out, and that there are models for speeding that up. And the opposition leader raised the requirement to bring to the Parliament as early as we can the legislation with respect to credit union supervision. And I gave her the assurance that the government will include these in our legislative agenda going forward. And we expect that we'll do it with opposition support as we go forward. We did have a very lively discussion on the economy, and I was able to talk to the opposition leader candidly about the government's challenges in dealing with the economy, and I gave her, on the question of jobs and the economy, I gave her the assurance that the government is as concerned as she is, and with respect to jobs, that we are trying to avoid the loss of any job, and we are pursuing a policy of trying to hold on to jobs as long as we can, while we fight to increase our revenue, to be able to support our lifestyle in Trinidad and Tobago, and to create opportunities for all those who are fortunate to have jobs, and for those who are aspiring to have jobs as we go forward. And I think she's, as a former Prime Minister who left office just at the cusp of the decline in our revenues, I think she understands what I've said and what I'm saying. And I detected a degree of empathy on that subject. And we did have a little discussion on the Couva hospital. The opposition leader raised that hospital as an issue. And I gave her the assurance that the non-opening of the hospital at this time has nothing to do with any policy of this government pursuing a situation that the hospital is not being opened because it was built by another government. Nothing is further from the truth. The hospital took a while to be completed, subsequent to the change of government. On completion, we did indicate to the public by way of the parliament that we would try to see if we can get a private sector participation in its operation as part of the national health infrastructure. And to do so, we went out seeking, by way of request for proposals from the public sector. And we did that. Unfortunately, the response has not been very encouraging. So we have been advised by the committee that looked at the proposals that the response has not been very encouraging because we did not see, the cabinet has not seen it yet, but the committee reported to the cabinet that the responses are not anything they would want to recommend to the government. That was disappointing to the government because we thought that by now we would have been able to move in that direction very quickly and bring the hospital into operation. But that having been said, I indicated to the opposition leader that the government may have to change its position in trying to go in that direction over and above what I just said about the lack of an awe-inspiring proposal from some private sector entity. What has happened is that you would have heard the government saying in the parliament recently that the structural engineers have advised the government, not recently, but quite some time, and now recent reviews have shown that the main block in the Port of Spain General Hospital, which is called the Central Block, I think it's called, is structurally unsound and unsafe and is open to collapse in the event of an earthquake. And that block houses 400 beds. And that being the case, notwithstanding whatever other challenges the government of Trinidad and Tobago might face, we have to focus our attention on this. And you would have heard the government saying recently that the cabinet has taken a decision that that block is to be demolished and to be replaced by a new building. But in the interim, the health system would lose access to 400 beds. And therefore, the new hospital in Couva would have to be factored into how we treat with that development, which we must address as a matter of urgency. Port of Spain Hospital serves the capital city all the way to Karanaj and Shakashakari and eastwards to Tunapuna. So the loss of 400 beds in that hospital is a matter of grave concern to the national community, and the government will have to find the resources to fix that problem. And that new hospital would in some way contribute to that, and we would advise the national population when the Ministry of Health would have worked out how we respond to this loss of 400 beds in Port of Spain. So those were the things that, the main items that we discussed, and those are the main decisions that we took. And going forward, I expect that the coming together of the various teams to address these decisions would see us advancing these proposals, and you would see these matters ending up in the parliament where parliamentary activity is required. So if there are any questions, I take a few questions now if you have any for me. Yes, Rhoda.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Robbie. With respect to the service commissions, is the government suggesting to do away with the service commissions entirely, or to amend or reconfigure the legislation so that how they operate changes?
All of that. It depends on what the review says is the best option, because there are always options. What we're talking about is looking at them, seeing how they are functioning or not functioning, and seeing what is the best option to rectify what needs to be rectified. So I'm not today going to say that we're going to do away with, or we're going to amend, or we're going to adjust. We're simply going to look at them and with a commitment to changing what exists now for the better.
What sort of time frame are you thinking about in terms of assessing, looking at, and working out how you're going to be moving forward? Because currently it's really not working for us.
I would want to say that the Attorney General's office would be whipped into shape with some sense of urgency on this matter, and I'm trusting that the public would weigh in on this quickly and give us a feedback and a feel for what we should do. You just mentioned 3 proposals right there. But with support from the opposition, we should be able to move with this with some sense of urgency and get something done with respect to improvement, because those of us who interact and interface with the public service, and I mean employees and managers and those who are serviced by the public service, cannot but admit that it's not working. And of course, we can have other models that provide the protection that these commissions were meant to provide in an earlier time when we were not entirely sure how independence would have worked, and protection was built into the situation to ensure that there were not abuse and so on and so on.
I have one more Service Commission question. With respect to the Police Service Commission, I know that the government is tied with in terms of dealing with the Commissioner of Police, but how are you all planning to treat with that Service Commission, if at all, especially since it falls under the remit of the President?
As long as the law exists the way it exists, what is happening now will continue, because we have to observe the law. And continue there means the incomprehensible approach to appointing an officer. Today we agreed that we should address the law, repeal it and replace it, and the government will move as quickly as possible to put something before the opposition on that matter.
Dr. Rowley, on the issue of the JLSC, you said the opposition was not in favor of changes to the Summary Offences Act and the criminal.
Not just that, the opposition was not in favor of any legislative response, right, because the good reason was given for that. I listened to the argument, and I can tell you there is some good reasoning there, and they are of the view that it will not solve the problem, it might even create new problems.
But the issue of Section 137 of the Constitution was raised, and that deals with the establishment, for example, of a tribunal to investigate matters there. So is it that that is something that's being considered?
I am not going to advise myself on this matter, so I will say no more on it for the moment, except that the opposition pointed out that there are certain pertinent information that is unavailable and will only become available and established by way of recourse to Section 137. That is their position. And I will not advise myself on this matter.
Just to take up, Section 137 deals with the removal of a judge?
No, it's a tribunal for inquiring into and establishing facts.
Okay. But the fact that yourself and the opposition leader could not come to any resolution on this issue suggests that the problem is far bigger than either of you can handle, the government and opposition. Given the fact that one of the problems that people have had with the judiciary is not simply the question of transparency, which you have mentioned, but the question of judicial accountability. Did you all at all explore any avenues such as making the Judicial and Legal Service Commission accountable to a committee of Parliament, for example?
No, we did not discuss that. But we certainly, what we discussed was the specific issue that has to be addressed with people not being able to find access to the courts, and the question of how judges are appointed and the transparency of that process and who gets appointed to the bench. That's all we discussed today. What you have raised there might be for another time.
Are you prepared to have follow-up discussions with the opposition leader on some of these issues?
Yes, well, we agreed that we will continue talking on these and other issues. And from that standpoint, I think today is a watershed day in terms of parliamentary and other developments, because we have had this before. We agreed that we'll continue addressing these issues as we go forward.
Do you think that there is, on this question of the GLSC, that there is any room for closing the gap
between the opposition and the government?
Yes.
I wouldn't say no, but I would say that the opposition was very clear and very firm that they would not support a legislative response.
But would the government be prepared to
well, if the government goes that way, without the opposition support, as I say, I'm not going to advise myself, and I better stop talking about this, because I don't know what I'm talking about. From the legal standpoint, the government has, as Prime Minister, I have to get legal advice, because I don't know what kinds of majority is required for something like this. But given the fundamental nature, I would hazard a guess that it would require some significant majority. But also, given the nature of the problem, the government would not want to fight the opposition on this, where we're talking about people's rights, people who are incarcerated, and we're trying to find a way for these people to get access to the courts. And it also appears as though, on the other side, that the judiciary itself is having difficulty in determining what is the way out. So I will wait to be properly advised on this matter before I answer questions of that nature.
Senators Ramdeen and Sturge have been pretty adamant about trying to get rid of the CJ. Was that raised to you at all?
No, that was not raised. The getting rid of the CJ or anybody was not raised, because that the problem is not a getting rid of anybody. That's a separate issue. The problem that we have in front of us is that we have people who are incarcerated and who come to court, and their matters cannot be advanced in the system because the system somehow has got itself into a tangle and needs to be untangled. Accountability for that is a separate matter.
Changing topic if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay. Changing topic to the Couva Children's Hospital. You said the response has not been very encouraging. Can you elaborate more on what has come forward to you?
I have not seen the documents. I just saw a brief report as to what came. But what I understand has come is that persons have made proposals as to what they want to do, if given the opportunity. And none of those seem to have found favor. What the cabinet did, we appointed a small committee of qualified people to evaluate what came to us and to make recommendations to the cabinet. So in the event that the cabinet was going to take a decision on a private sector proposal, it wouldn't have been the cabinet selecting anybody. It would have been done on the advice of an arm's length team that would have looked at the proposals. The team did that. It was chaired by former PS in Finance, Alison Lewis, who is now chairman of the board, and a couple other people. And they have reported that they have not seen anything that they would like to recommend to the government. So that puts an end to that, because the government had said, we will go that route.
Dr. Rowley, this is a follow-up question to Mr. Haynes' question. How soon can we see the Couva Hospital opening its doors?
Well, now that I just told you that we went one way that has been unsuccessful, we can probably say that now, and then we now have immediately the question of the loss of 400 beds. So we now have to rethink, and I would anticipate that sometime in the not too distant future, the Ministry of Health would make a statement on this matter, which could see that facility being utilized as part of the wider infrastructure. Because we are going to have to withdraw 400 beds in Port of Spain.
Dr. Rowley, what was the opposition leader's response to your statements on the Integrity Commission? And also, some may argue that by your statements, you are creating an atmosphere where people are losing confidence in the Integrity Commission.
Well, let me answer the first question first. First question is this. I would rather if you ask the opposition leader what her position is on that. I don't want to speak for her. On the second question, no statement of mine could contribute to the loss of confidence in the commission. Because when I spoke, the confidence was already lost.
Just to follow up on that, but isn't it a little, some may say, irresponsible for an institution that can investigate members of public life, which would be you, and you are in a position that may discredit that institution? How does that may influence people's decision or how they see the institution?
So, according to that argument, we shouldn't criticize the police because they could lock up any of us. If there's evidence of wrongdoing on my part, I criticize the police, and I'm sure you do from time to time.
True.
If there's evidence of wrongdoing on your part, you think that by criticizing the police you'll get away?
But do I have the ability to change or adjust the legislation that affects? You are also in that position, is where I'm getting. You have the position to change it, you can change it.
And it is because I have that opportunity. I represent people. I represent 29,000 people. I don't only speak for myself. So don't see it as I'm talking to myself. And I don't know that an institution is sacrosanct and is beyond criticism because I hold an office. What we should face are, is there any support, is there any factual basis for my comment? If there's no factual basis for my comment, then you can quite properly accuse me of being irresponsible.
You said, Dr. Rowley, that you wanted a review of the Integrity Commission to see if it could be returned to, I'm paraphrasing here, its original mandate per se, right? If a review finds otherwise, is that we look into just get rid of the Integrity Commission?
Let us not prejudge it. I won't deal with the ifs. I would wait to see what comes out of a review of the situation, because it's not a good situation. I mean, I would tell you the simple matter of filling out thousands of forms and stacking them up in our office somewhere does not provide integrity. And there are other models which we can look at. And that's only my view.
With respect to adding on to what Kijan and Kamala are asking there, the Integrity Commission has a far wider range of responsibilities and duties than just putting out who has filled out forms and not filled out forms. Did you and the opposition leader discuss or consider ways in which you...
No, we didn't go into the detail. We just raised the area of concern, the issue. Okay. We didn't raise any details because, I mean, we spent 3 hours this afternoon. If we had gone into more details, I would have kept you a bit later. But suffice it to say, yes, you're right, that there's quite a wider remit. But I did say earlier on when I spoke that if one looks at what the intention was and what the output was supposed to be and determine that it's fit for purpose, can we really say that we have got the results that we anticipated? The answer has to be, from where I sit. In fact, let me not tell what my answer is. But when you look at what was supposed to have been done, what is to come out of that existence, what is Trinidad and Tobago's experience?
Might funding be a problem?
I don't know. I think I've seen it said that range of power, they don't have certain authorities.
Yeah.
I know that the Parliament has always been mindful of providing resources. I've known that resources have been provided. I have not seen an absence of resource. I mean, if it was a resource and you have 100 things to do and you only do 10, you could say, well, it was a resource issue, and if you had more resources, you might do 25. That is not our existence. That's not our experience. There's no upward movement in the numbers of, you know, I don't want to come across as though I'm carrying a bee in my bonnet about the commission, but I'm simply saying that we basically have not been able to impact upon the level of corruption in this country. Having an integrity commission. You ask anybody about corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's a general sentiment that the country is corrupt to the core, especially in the public sector. And then you ask, what has been the response? How many instances have the commission successfully carried out its mandate to ensure that there's accountability on the upward? So therefore, in short, the thing is not working.
What timeline have you all established for bringing the legislation to repeal and replace arrangements?
We didn't put a date on it, but we thought that is something that requires attention. And again, the onus is on the government. The opposition leader said to me that if we bring proposals, they will want to look at it.
But I would imagine this would be a very urgent, given the crime situation,
well, it is for the government to order its priorities and try and get this done somewhere. All of these matters are important matters in the country's government.
Right.
So it's for the government to now try and apportion the workload and try and bring these things forward as quickly as we can. But we didn't put a date and say like December, March, or so on. Well, the only date that was put, I agreed to give the opposition leader an update on the non-legislative matters that we're dealing with in national security by the end of this month, and also that we'll aim to do the campaign finance reform before the next election in 2020.
All right, but
so those are the only 2 dates that we had literally pinned down.
Okay, given the apparent intractability of the problem with the GLSC, the 53 matters that are in limbo, what comfort do the people who are affected by this problem, what comfort can the government give to them, especially since having met with the opposition leader, the magnitude of the problem seems to be too big for either?
Well, the comfort that they will take is that the matter is being addressed, because the proposals to the opposition was the first involvement of the government in this matter. We've got a response which says that if you come to the parliament with that suggestion, it will not be supported. I am now hoping that the judiciary would have heard that and would take that on board, that if the parliament is not going to find its way forward to support it, the question is what next? And I would not advise myself on that now.
Yeah, what's your time?
But the judiciary has been with the problem for the last how many months? So yeah, clearly.
But a solution was being advanced. Today, that solution, right, did not find favor with the opposition in this meeting. And that to me is a clear signal that all the persons involved need to take that on board.
And all those involved, meaning the government, the DPP, and the opposition?
The DPP, because what has been turned down is a proposal that came from the DPP, yeah?
Right.
With the support of the Chief Justice. So I'm saying that position of the opposition today puts it back to others to rethink whether there are other proposals to come forward or whether there are other pathways. And it is against that background, to answer your question, that those who are affected would now know that the matter is being addressed in this way.
What do you say to people who contend that the government's, the Chinese wall was up for too long and that the government should have taken a more proactive position much earlier in the development of this dam?
I will maintain that this matter is a matter in the judiciary, of the judiciary's doing, and the executive, of which I head, gave the judiciary room, ample room, to adjust its positions and to make recommendations as to how to rectify it. That has now been done, and that's where we're at. If it turns out that the advice that we get is a simple majority, we will take all the advice that's available to the government. But as I told you, I am not in the business of advising myself on the matter of law. And now that I'm speaking to you, minutes after this position has come forward, the government will have to be advised on this matter as to what options are available to the government. Having heard what was said by the opposition leader, because in law there are always 2 points. There's never one point of view in law. Now, I don't know any issue where all the lawyers are on the same side. Right? So, having heard the opposition leader, what is clear is that they will not support, at this stage, a matter of a legislative solution. So I'm reporting what was said. However, the government is to be advised as to what that means. Okay?
It's on another. It's sort of unusual to have a white paper. We talked about a white paper on campaign finance. Yes. It's unusual to have a white paper coming from a government and opposition. I mean, you normally associate a white paper as the government's proposal for discussion by everyone.
On this particular issue, you see this issue of campaign finance reform is not only a matter for the government and the opposition. It's a matter for the wider national community. And that is why, before the government runs to the parliament with our view and try to enact it, we suggested that the government and the opposition engage the matter and come to some kind of common understanding as to what is acceptable. And in so doing, engage the public as well. And when you engage the public, there are other political parties out there. There are about how many political parties in Trinidad and Tobago now? There are about 6 or 8 or 10. They all will be given an opportunity to weigh in on this, and the public. And then when you do that, it will fall to the government to codify it in some form and bring a piece of legislation that the opposition and maybe others would have agreed upon. And then you take it to the parliament, knowing that you have the support. Because if campaign finance reform is to be effective, given the Jamaican experience and elsewhere, I would suggest that you would need some significant majority to have good law. You could pass something that says you increase the reporting from 50,000 to 500,000 and pass that. But that is not going to be an effective campaign finance reform that will treat with the problem of how money is getting to elections and how political parties and candidates fund themselves. If you want to have that as the outcome, then you will have to get certain rights shaved, and therefore you have to have the requisite majority. And we are talking about passing effective campaign finance reform legislation.
Dr. Holly, how confident are you in carrying out these processes? Because it seems as if it's a lengthy process before general elections, the next general elections. How confident are you?
Always starts with the first step. The longest journey starts with the first step. And we are prepared, and as the opposition leader pointed out, there are a number of documents which already exist and debates already which should have taken place on this issue. So we're not starting from year one. We are starting somewhere along the way. And if we genuinely address this issue, I have confidence that with the support of my colleagues in the parliament, we can get this in time for the next election.
Just one final question. Are you confident, that we can wrap it up here, are you confident that the promises made today are going to be followed through? Do you have any fears that when she goes back to her base, everything may be thrown out on your back at square?
If that happens, I'd be disappointed. As of this minute, I trust the assurances given by my colleague, and I know, I've been where she is. I mean, she runs a team, and they're not going to just accept whatever the government says. It will be rigorously examined for more reasons than one. And at the end of the day, I place my faith, as I've always done, in my belief that the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago, including the politicians, are decent, right-thinking people who want the best for Trinidad and Tobago. I place my trust in that. One more question from Rhoda, and then we go.
Tobago, because we're talking about white paper, green paper, long bits of legislation, the THA, the promise to amend and to give them autonomy is at least 10 years old. So what's the time frame now to address that matter?
Well, when we talk to the Legislative Reform Committee, they will give us a better idea as to how much time they would need to pull together what we're asking them to do.
Wasn't there a green paper already out, and wasn't there some sort of bill that had been brought to, a rush bill brought to Parliament?
Yeah, well, but we said that those will become working documents.
Okay.
So they will be, the THA document, that too will become a working document. There's a draft legislation which was authored by the THA and Tobago, because there was widespread consultation in Tobago, widespread consultation that resulted in a senior council drafting some legislation to reflect what they think the Tobagonians wanted and were saying. That becomes a working document for the Reform Committee, for the House Committee.
House Committee.
Right?
Any chance of the notes from that meeting between you and the opposition leader becoming, public, be available to the public?
Well, I have a very efficient note taker, and we didn't do anything that can't stand the light of day. So when I see it, I will decide if there's anything in there which ought not to be seen by the public. I will be surprised. But the note taker will now go and do. I gave you the points that but the note taker will do a report on the meeting, and that report. I guess if the press wants to see it, I don't know that it would be difficult to not let you see.
Has today's meeting changed your view of the opposition leader and of how government and opposition, which has been so far, engaging in a fairly adversarial relationship, can operate?
Let us not expect more than is reality. It was the government and the opposition meeting, and the adversarial nature of our model will continue. But it doesn't mean that has to become stifling, and it doesn't mean that we have to be, how should I put it? It doesn't mean that we as a parliament ought to be so adversarial as to deem ourselves to be unfit for the purpose for which we were elected. I think the significance of today's meeting is the willingness of parties in the parliament with responsibility for the country's business to sit down and talk about our work program and to discuss ways forward to deliver to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's how I see this. If there's a withdrawal of enthusiasm on the part of others, that would be disappointing. I would be disappointed, and I think the country would be disappointed. On the other hand, I would like to believe that it's an opening where all of us could satisfy the wishes and the aspirations of those who place their trust in us and give us the offices that we hold. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Copies of the code of conduct.
This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.
The question is that clause 30